This week on Kibbe on Liberty, I am talking with my friend Steve Baker. Newly released from his January 6 charges, his new investigation is going to red pill you like you've never seen before. Check it out. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Steve, welcome back and congratulations. You're looking slightly freer than the last time I saw you.
I feel much freer, Matt. It's an incredible thing. We're just a few hours short of it being exactly 2 weeks since President Trump, after his inauguration on the 20th of January, announced the blanket pardons and commutations. And in my case, I don't know if you know this or not, Matt, I didn't get a pardon.
No?
I got something much better. I got an actual case dismissal with prejudice, which is basically saying that what happened to me over the last 4 years never happened. I mean, although it did. Technically, I rolled the dice. You recall you were first up after I walked out of the courthouse. But I think, what was that, November 12th? I was supposed to begin my trial that day. I had informed my attorneys that I was not going to put myself through what was nothing more than a shaming exercise by the DOJ and the court system. And I knew a few things about the law. The first thing is that Trump had just been reelected the week before. And we also had his promised pardons as part of his campaign package. And so I rolled the dice and I pled guilty to all four of the basic, nonviolent misdemeanor charges that all of the misdemeanor defendants were hit with on January 6th. And the reason I did that, and which caused, some consternation with some people, even those closest to me, is, why did you do that? You said you would never plead guilty to something that you weren't guilty of. Well, that was the roll of the dice that I took. Is I knew that if I was not sentenced yet, because my sentencing hearing was not scheduled on that day with you, sitting right there in the studio with you, until March the 6th. Trump was going to be inaugurated on January 20th. He promised he was going to make these moves very early on, if not the first day itself. And I knew that if that happened, then, because my case was in that netherworld, I had not been sentenced. I had not spent any time in jail other than, the day that I got arrested. I knew that there was a unique quirk in the federal law that until you are actually sentenced, you are not convicted. It doesn't matter what your case status was up to that point. Didn't matter if you went through a jury trial, a bench trial. Didn't matter whether a jury unanimously found you guilty on all counts, whatever the case may be, until you are sentenced. And the federal judge then files his sentencing and conviction paperwork. It never happened. And I got lucky.
Yeah, and I realize that's a very big deal for you because being pardoned always suggests that some crime, in fact, was committed.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Look, I'm ecstatic for so many of those who got pardons. There's a few characters that I would like to have been called out in a case by case review if they had had time to do that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, because of the way that the Department of Justice behaved and the way they handled the cases of even the most violent perpetrators that day, even the most despicable, the most infamous characters of that day, all of their cases were mishandled. All of them had violations of due process or constitutional rights. And as a result of that poisoned well, I think that what President Trump did was exactly the right thing.
So let's quickly remind people what the Trump executive order did. And also, just actually, before we do that, just remind people, everyone should go back and watch the several episodes that we did together that sort of followed your case from the beginning to the end. And I'll reshare those in the context of this conversation. But just to remind people, you're a journalist, you're a citizen journalist who happened to be near the Capitol that day, so you did what you do, and you went in and you reported.
Right. No more complicated than that. And as a matter of fact, as we've demonstrably shown the American people, is that there was something between 80 and 100 other journalists. Now, we're talking about not only mainstream credentialed journalists working for the New York Times, LA Times, the New Yorker, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there was probably in that number 30 to 40 uncredentialed media people as described by the Department of Justice and FBI, meaning that those entities, our Department of Justice, recognizes in the new media podcasters, bloggers, social media influencers, credentialed and otherwise, as being part of the new media. Now, in my particular case, going all the way back to when the FBI first rang my phone, this was July of 21. And at 10 o'clock in the morning, I got a call from Special Agent Garrett Doss. He says, "Good morning, I'm Agent Doss with the FBI." I said, "What took you so long?" And then we started down my path. And we scheduled my first voluntary interview with the FBI in August of 21, when my attorney and I arrived at the door at the FBI field office here in the Raleigh area. They greeted us, two agents, Doss and then also Special Agent Craig Noyes, greeted us at the door and said, "We probably cannot do the interview today. Give us a few minutes. We got to run in the back. Y'all have a seat here in the lobby," which we did. And they took off into the back behind their, secure area. It took them about a half hour before they came back. And then they notified me that they had just received a call from Washington and that they could not interview me because of my status as a member of the media. And that was at the time as an independent blogger and podcaster.
Right. You didn't have an affiliation with Blaze TV at the time.
That's correct. And so I was completely unaware of this. And as a matter of fact, most mainstream media colleagues of mine also are unaware of the fact that there's a section in the U.S. Criminal Code, the Code of Federal Regulations, in which it specifically details that members of the media cannot be interrogated by any federal investigative organization without express written permission by the United States Attorney General's office. So therefore, for the DOJ and FBI to even conduct that investigation into my own behavior that day, they had to get a signed off letter from the Attorney General's office, Merrick Garland's office. And it was ultimately the assistant at the time, Lisa Monaco, who signed off on my investigation. She negotiated with my attorney. I entered into my voluntary interview with the FBI on a proffer agreement, which basically, it was no more complicated than this. Nothing that I said in my interview could be used against me in court if, in fact, they decided to go forward with charges against me, which was kind of weird, unless I perjured myself. If I lied to the FBI in that interview, then that would be the only thing that could be used against me. So I said, let's dance. So we did.
This we'll get back to the Trump pardon, but this reminds me of some of the death wails coming from corporate media today on this subject of what constitutes the media. And it used to be this elite club of the New York Times and the network news stations, and two things have happened that everyone's claiming is an attack on the free press, which is ironic, coming from the left, given that not just this story, like a storied history of the Obama administration and the Biden administration going after the media. But Pete Hegseth has apparently kicked out some of the corporate legacy media from the Pentagon. And my first question on that was, why the hell were they in there in the first place? That sounds incestuous. It sounds like a conflict of interest. It sounds like you're the pets of the military-industrial complex. and you so cherish your office there that you wouldn't possibly question them on something that actually mattered. Um, that that to me was, I guess, surprising, but not surprising that that relationship existed in the first place.
Well, it's not surprising, and we know why. I mean, that's what part of the legacy of what we've often referred to as the Mockingbird media, and so forth, and it's real, and it's real even today. That hasn't ever stopped. It is a real live, functioning. Vessel within the mass media industrial complex is that they have individuals that are in fact, for all intents and purpose, they're ensconced within, they're embedded rather within various government organizations, and they are used specifically as mouthpieces and tools and people that we leak special information through when we need to control the narrative. And it exists, and I think maybe I've probably been honest with this myself in a couple of incidences where, in fact, where I found myself working on the same exact page as a couple of Congress members, one in particular who has sat at your microphone a couple of times at least, and we find that we're working on the same project and we're working on the same information, that I will in fact amplify or highlight his work, and vice versa. They will take my work and amplify it as well within committees, investigations, that sort of thing.
So, Project Mockingbird, I'm now fully convinced. If you've ever watched any of these reels of Hollywood stars and corporate media and all of these other influencers mouthing the same exact talking points on, let's say, the most shocking is perhaps that the origins of COVID, the lab leak theory, is a conspiracy theory. I'm fairly convinced that there's some dark office with gray suited Soviets sending out talking points, and that all these people are still either explicitly or implicitly on the payroll. So I'm sure it's not called Project Mockingbird anymore, but it absolutely still exists. 100% convinced.
Yeah, it absolutely exists, and apart from the phrase Project Mockingbird or the Mockingbird media, we learned even from Rush Limbaugh back in the early days of his radio ascent to fame, and he was talking about the facts that went out every morning, to all of the major media players, and it literally was, they were, back when everybody had a fax machine, they got their talking points that morning. This is what's important today. This is what you need to cover. This is what you need to highlight. This is the spin you need to put on this particular news story. And it's no longer a fax, but it is an email that goes out, and it's real. It exists, and it does in fact exist. I don't think you or I will ever be invited to be on that particular email list, but I would like to sneak my way in someday.
Yeah, if we do get invited, perhaps we've done something horrifically wrong.
That's right.
So quickly, and I want to follow this thread of these bizarre and clandestine projects that our government is apparently involved in that we're now discovering. But to be clear, and you may remember this, in the last time we talked, you had decided that in a perfect world you would sort of vet and separate the violent actors on January 6th from everybody else, but that the system was so corrupt that you yourself endorsed pardoning everybody. And I guess I take it that that's precisely what Trump did.
That's exactly it, and I think that was exactly the counsel that he received from whoever he was getting that from. Now, we know a few people that had access to the inside. I certainly will not brag or claim to anything as close to direct access to the president at the time, but we were a generation or two removed, and from our own input into that decision making process.
Well, by the way, my assumption is that the president watches this show religiously every week.
Of course,
I can't prove that, but it's possible.
Yeah, but the one thing that I do know, and this is particularly related to my case, is that Glenn Beck had his ear. Glenn Beck was out on the road with him in the final days of his campaign, actually campaigning with him. Charlie Kirk famously went on Glenn's show and said, your guy, I am on the because Kirk was on the transition team and he had his ear every day. And he said very specifically, he said, your guy is going to get a pardon. Talking about me. So we know we had some people that did in fact have the president's ear prior to the election, and then certainly after and prior to the inauguration. And I don't want to beat this horse to death, but this is something I really feel, Matt, is important for everyone to understand. There were really, really bad, despicable characters who got a full pardon from the president. I'm talking about bad people. We're talking about people that were career criminals. They had up to, I have a name in mind. I'm not going to name these characters. I'm not going to give them air at all. But one in particular had 38 prior convictions before January 6th. There is a known convicted pedophile who was convicted of that before January 6th, who received a pardon. There's another guy who ran a criminal operation from his prison for 4 years. We think that he raised somewhere in the realm of about $2 million during this time. He was paying his prison guards up to $2,000 a month for a contraband cell phone so he could do podcasts, make phone calls, call into radio shows, and operate his criminal enterprise from inside the penitentiary during this entire time. He got a full pardon. And there were other guys, as I've said before, that did bad things that day, whether it was their intent to show up to do bad things, or they just got caught up in the moment and became stupid with the activity of the provocateurs around them. They fell into the mob mentality, whatever the case may be. There are people that did bad things. But as we mentioned, the system itself was so corruptly focused on winning and creating a narrative and then prosecuting based on that narrative that Nancy Pelosi famously said. She said, we are going to establish and preserve the narrative of January 6th. And once that was set in place, and all of the characters were from, this is Merrick Garland all the way down. Once that was established, they didn't care, Matt, whether they followed the law or not. They didn't care if they created evidence out of thin air. They didn't care if they withheld exculpatory evidence from the defense teams if they could get by with it. And this was, 100% nonviolent, innocent grandmothers that were treated this way, SWAT raided at their home with automatic rifles trained at the middle of their head and on their families' members and their children as well. It didn't matter if it was them. It doesn't matter if it was these most despicable characters that I described earlier. Every single one of them had due process, constitutional rights violated, and any number of other things, all the way up until real, identifiable, by definition, tortures that took place in the jails and in the prisons during their terms.
So I know you don't want to name the names of these despicable characters, but to be clear, you're not necessarily talking about members of the Biden family that got blanket pardons for their crimes.
Yeah, well, the one thing that Joe Biden did upon his exit from the presidency is he literally cleared the path for Trump to basically get by with doing whatever he wanted to do as it was related to pardons. He pardoned so many despicable characters, not to mention all of the members of the Biden crime family syndicate. But by so doing, it's like, okay, Trump probably just went, well, I got a free pass now.
Yeah, hold my beer. Yeah, hold my beer. But by the way, one of the things that the timing is beautiful. A shameless plug for the new episode of The Cover-Up, which will be coming out this week, featuring Dr. Richard Ebright. And Ebright has been Anthony Fauci's arch nemesis since going back to 2001, blowing the whistle again and again and again, and very few people listened to him at the time. But we reveal in this episode why it is precisely that the Biden administration backdates Fauci's pardon to 2014, because it's not the first crime that Fauci committed, but it's clearly the path that actually led to the lab leak in the pandemic. So that it's interesting that I'm looking forward to see what Rand Paul does now that Anthony Fauci is pardoned, but he's not free to plead the fifth when the government oversight committee that Rand now chairs calls him forward. So that I think we're going to learn some things, and my whole mission with that series was not just to hold Anthony Fauci accountable, but to make sure that whoever Anthony Fauci's boss is, and I have some theories about who that might be, that they're held accountable. And they didn't receive pardons. So we'll see what happens there.
But that's what has to happen, Matt, is now it's time for Congress to do their job. The House of Representatives and their committees no longer have an excuse about, well, the Senate we don't have the Senate, so we're not going to get support there. They no longer have the excuse that it doesn't matter because we don't have a president that will sign our bills if we get the legislation through. They have no excuse now. And this is one of the things that I'm most excited about, because I do have some promises, and you know what promises are like from politicians on Capitol Hill, but I do have some assurances from them that some of the work that I've been doing for the last 4 years is finally going to see some element of fruition. For instance, like your situation and your interest in Fauci. Well, it is absolutely imperative that they bring Fauci back in, put him under oath again, because he's now while this pardon was retroactive to 2014, it does not cover future crimes. So if he is under oath and he lies again, they can now go after him. It's the same thing with some of these Capitol police officers. It's the same thing with some of the upper echelon, the white shirts, as they say, upstairs in the Capitol Police Command Center that are incredibly corrupt, and their corruption was revealed as a result of what happened and our scrutiny after the results that took place on January 6th that brought that to our attention. It is now time for these guys, and some of them also got pardons, by the way. And so it's time to bring them in front of Congress, set them at the table, put them on the witness stand, get them under oath again, and see if they lie this time, because we have the benefit of 4 years of video evidence that will show that what they got by with in trials 2 and 3 years ago, they won't get by with this time.
Regular viewers of Kibbe on Liberty already know how obsessed I have been with the pandemic industrial complex and all of the stupid, authoritarian, and downright evil things that the government did to us during COVID-19. Well, I'm proud to announce a new investigative series that looks to get to the bottom of all of that. It's called The Cover-Up, and I'm producing it in cooperation with Blaze TV. The only place you're going to see this is Blaze TV, so go to FauciCoverup.com/Kibbe and use the code FauciLied for $30 off your annual subscription. Do it now. The truth is out there. Yeah, I mean, I'm obviously confident that Rand Paul will keep the promises that he made. I'm also confident that the House Weaponization Committee will pursue similar goals, and it's going to be important. It's going to be important because I think we're just scratching the tip of the iceberg, and you personally have freaked me out and red pilled me once again. I'm a cynical libertarian that expect corruption. I expect self-serving legislators. I expect bureaucrats that grow their own power at the expense of the American people. But you, in the process of investigating January 6th, your sources have revealed some super creepy weapons that our government may in fact be using against us. And I know that sounds like a crazy sentence, but strap in, folks, because Steve's about to get even crazier on us.
Matt, one of the things that I don't necessarily like this aspect of what I do, but when the government pisses you off enough that you, as I'd like to say, during the I'm sorry, during the COVID-19 lockdowns, they weaponized me against them. And it began with my research into the origins of COVID. And just like your stories are going forward, we're learning more and more as time goes past. But I was very, very interested and became not an expert by any means. I mean, I didn't even know. Uh, there were so many medical terminology and scientific terms that I'd never even heard of before as it relate, comorbidity. What the hell is a comorbidity? Well, we learned very early on in the COVID lockdown regime that what a comorbidity was, and so I'm not going to claim that I became an epidemiologist or an expert in that level, but my math skills are such that I learned that it wasn't that complicated of an operation to track and do the math on. I remember seeing Thomas Massey when he did his he did a napkin presentation, and of course his was advanced MIT engineering math that he used. I figured out what the basically the infected fatality rate was just using long division, fifth grade level. Long division is what I used to figure it out. And I was very fascinated after I saw Massey's long form version of the math he used and my short form version of the math, and we came to almost within the smallest 100th of a percentile the same infected fatality rate. And so, and then that was ultimately verified by Stanford and University of Stockholm and everyone else. And so, I I don't like the fact that when I get pissed off at the government that I have to develop some level of proficiency in a particular topic. And when we got past, not well, we're still not past everything we need to know about COVID. But when I entered the next phase, which then was January 6th, and I began, and government pissed me off there, then I became somewhat proficient, if not expert, in the policing aspects of what uh, the use of force, for instance, of Capitol Police and Metro PD that day. I became somewhat expert in understanding what the violations were that the FBI was committing in their own investigations of various defendants. Like, for instance, I mentioned the SWAT raids. For the 100-year history of the FBI leading up to the massive, unprecedented dragnet that was thrown across the country related to January 6th, the FBI had never so much as even investigated a misdemeanor case before. It was the first thing they learned. I learned from actual FBI agents, both whistleblowers, retirees, and active FBI agents, is that at the academy the first week they learned that we don't go after the minnows, we only go after whales. And in fact, in the financial crime side of FBI, if it was less than $1 million fraud scheme, they didn't even bother with it. If it was 250,000, leave that to local police if they want to deal with it. It didn't even matter if it was across state lines. Um, the bottom line is that they were doing things they had never done before, which absolutely signaled to us the politicization of that entire persecution process. And so I got angry and I went to work on it, and I started uncovering things that nobody else was finding, especially once I got access to the Capitol CCTV viewing room. So that's the long way and the overly verbose way of getting to your question here. Is in the middle of all of that, there were questions that we had about the behaviors of some of these unsavory characters. The first and the most obvious thing is you want to think that maybe some of these provocateurs were paid by someone. Were they paid by federal agencies? Were they paid by people supportive of Trump? Were they, foreign NGOs of some sort that just wanted to rile things up? Were there people that were independent of government that wanted to take Trump out for very? So you have to look at everything, and if you don't ask the questions, then you're doing a disservice to our job of investigative journalism. And so you have to ask the questions about everybody. And I have always said I don't care. I've never cared whose desk this ultimately went back to. I didn't care if it went back to Nancy Pelosi's desk or it went back to Donald Trump's desk. I don't care. Part of that has to do with my libertarianism. But at the end of the day, I got sidelined through this process when I first learned, not sidelined, but it became a secondary thread that I pulled on for the last 4 years. And the first part of that was learning that there were elements of our Department of Defense embedded in the crowd that day for an operation for which I did not know. I didn't know if it was for nefarious reasons or if they were there just to look after business in case things got really bad. I mean, the Capitol is our quote unquote seat of government. And we had a joint session of Congress, and the vice president was in there that day. And so it would not be completely out of the realm of, possibility that for non-nefarious reasons, elite elements of our special forces groups might be there. Now, you got a question of posse comitatus, and does that apply on the Capitol grounds itself, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a whole nother debate. I'll let the legal scholars deal with that. But nevertheless, I knew they were there. So I start pulling on that thread for 4 years. And then in the process of pulling on that thread, I learned that there were an entire new classification of what we have referred to and have heard for years about, something called directed energy weapons. Now, sometimes it's hard to know where to start because I like to keep this as simple as possible, easy to understand. All right, let's talk about the non-nefarious aspects of directed energy weapons. For years, various governments, including our own Department of Defense, have been in development of both what they call audio and radio weapons. Radio meaning more microwave. These types of weapons are used on battlefield and for riot control. They're big truck mounted. You see the big discs mounted on the top of a armored vehicle or something like that. And you can go to YouTube and you can see these weapons demonstrated. In fact, you can see Congress members actually volunteering to get hit with a microwave dose. It's about, a second, 2 seconds worth of a real quick hit of a microwave burst. And you feel like that entire side of your body is on fire. Well, if you're on the streets in a riot situation, you're going to turn around and run from that experience. And, instinctively and impulsively. It's just something you're going to do. They also have what they call LRADs. That's long range audio devices, which a couple different versions of those. They, again, big truck mounted or armored vehicle mounted devices. They can turn up audio so loud at a particular frequency that you feel like your brain is about to explode, and you do exactly the same thing. You turn and run from whatever the police line is that you're trying to breach or the building you're trying to get into, and you run away. That's the intended purpose. There's nothing nefarious about that. The same weapons can be used on the battlefield in the same exact way. But as they used to say in one of the famous old cigarette ads, they've come a long way, baby. These weapons have insanely greater potential, and with the key word being insane. And in so describing these, you have to go back to the 50s when the Soviets were developing what they called psychotronic weapons. That was their nomenclature at the time. We have access to that now through freedom of information. Obviously, there was a tremendous amount of documentation that was turned over at the fall of the Soviet Union. There's an equivalency to the Freedom of Information Act where we can actually access now KGB files on individuals over there.
Does any of this go back to the Church Committee, or was this just revealed after the fall of the Soviet Union?
I specifically have not looked into that, so I couldn't answer that. But it keeps coming up in our in our research. So yeah, I would imagine that there is a connection there. But what the Soviets were developing at the time and had become very expert at was actually really keying in on these particular radio frequencies, RF frequencies and or microwaves that set and attenuated at the proper frequency range could have effect on different parts of the human body. So let me be just, again, very, very simplistic about my description of this. If you're driving around in your car, let's say you have an older model, you got a 78 or pickup truck, and it's just got an old school antenna coming out of the hood area of the car. So this antenna is up there. Without that antenna, your little radio that you have, the old radios that we had in our car, AM, FM, that's all it would receive, those in that range of frequency bands. Without that antenna, our radio didn't work. But the antenna properly attached, that antenna was designed to resonate at this fairly wide range of radio frequencies on the AM and FM radio bands, right? So it's not complicated. The interesting thing about that band of frequencies is it didn't affect us. So we weren't damaged by those radio frequencies. Our car could operate. It didn't affect the engine or the functions of the vehicle or any other number of things. But everything that's made of matter will respond to a particular radio frequency range in some manner. You just have to figure out which one it is. And what the Soviets were expert at discovering was which frequency would our lungs vibrate and resonate at. It wasn't the AM FM band. Which one would our heart resonate at? Which one would the various different folds of our brain would resonate at? And sometimes it was in the same exact frequency, but attenuated just slightly, just slightly off of center, that a different fold of the brain. And when they were able to discover that, they could affect behaviors. So we all know about the psychotropic experimentations, like, for instance, MK Ultra and the use of drugs, LSD, and other types of drugs to experiment. And unfortunately, this is one of the dark sides of our government. Is our government has a long, dark history of experimenting on involuntary groups of individuals with science, particularly related to Defense Department and intelligence work that, well, let's just say you didn't go in and sign a permission slip and get paid for it.
Yeah. You go down the MK Ultra rabbit hole and you'll discover the grossly unethical experiments that were performed on unwitting lab rats, people, and the deaths that followed. So, and by the way, I should say this. I heard you say this on Blaze TV. Everything you're telling me so far is a Googleable event. You can document this without believing anything that Steve is telling us.
You can actually go to the CIA.gov website and read about everything that I've just said. CI.gov. We're talking about, these are in their files. This is all public information that they've been required to release, all declassified files on the development of these weapons. Now, I'm gonna skip forward from the 50s, and I'm going to talk about a smaller version that was developed by the British military experimented on with Irish troops in Ireland, again, an involuntary group, of these smaller versions of these things in which they were basically referring to them as agitation weapons, in which they could elicit any number of reactions from the soldiers, the Irish soldiers that they were experimenting on. They could make them run from a battlefield. They could make them so highly agitated that they would go into battle involuntarily. In other words, they could make them angry. They could make them think that they were losing their mind. They could make them think that they were hearing voices in their head. This was 1973. Now let's jump forward again. Let's jump all the way to 1991 with the fall of the Soviet Empire. When that happened, you had an entire massive the Soviet version of the military industrial complex was out of work, Matt. They had no idea where their next paycheck was coming from. So you had scientists and generals that were selling their research and their scientists to the highest bidder on the open market. Well, obviously, Americans, not only private companies, but the American government as well, were all over this, and we were buying these technologies. So last year, May 8th of 2024, there was a congressional hearing right there on Capitol Hill, an open hearing about the Havana syndrome, or the AHIs, which is the anomalous health incidents associated with directed energy weapons. And during that hearing, one of the witnesses testified. This is a European, I believe he's Bulgarian. He classifies himself as an investigative journalist, but there's a lot of crossover between the intelligence community and investigative journalism, and he personally examined in 1991 during this time a Soviet version of a backpack size directed energy weapon that could in fact do some of these things that we're talking about. This technology was attained. It was certainly being developed by the Americans already anyway. But once we learned what the Soviets had done, began to combine the research and the technology, the science together, by the late 90s, our own special operations, and this is where we get into the non-Googleable side of this, rabbit hole that I've been down for the last 4 years, is that elements of our own special ops and intelligence community had what they called a agitation weapon. And this agitation weapon could be either audio or RF. And these particular weapons could, in fact, make people violent, make them go crazy, hear voices in their head. This is one that is actually, this is where we get into the differentiation between nefarious intent and then what the positive aspects of what this type of science can do. And I'll just give you one example of the positive aspects. Let's say that you are in a battlefield situation and you have 10,000 meters away is another element of your own troops, but you're separated by the enemy, and you need to communicate with them, either target coordinates or whatever you need, plans, battle operations, that sort of thing. And you don't dare use traditional radio because you know it's being monitored by the enemy. You probably don't dare even use encrypted radio because they've probably broken your encryption long before anyway. So what you can do is now with this particular audio device is you can send what is the equivalent of a laser beam. So this is a directed radio signal or audio signal to an individual 10,000 meters away, hit them in the head with high powered telescopes and that sort of, lenses so that you can see them. You can aim it, direct it at them, hit them in the head, and talk to them in their head. They're the only one that can hear it. Any of the other troops standing around them cannot hear it. The enemy cannot hear it. But you can communicate the battle plans or the targeting vectors or whatever the case may be to another soldier that far away. And it's a tight, very tight beam rather than a typical radio wave that does this. It's like the radio version of a laser. And that's an incredible technology to have. But what if I can talk to you in your head and tell you to kill someone? What if I can talk to you in your head in such a way, scripted over a period of time, that makes you think you're hearing the voice of God and you become convinced of it? And you decide it's okay to take a shot at the president from, 150 yards away on top of a building in Butler, PA. That's just hypothetical because I don't know that. Let's be clear about that. But this is what the capability of this technology is. And this is real. Now, that particular technology I just explained right here, that's also open source. You can find that. What's not open source, and which I had a member of our special forces community asked me not to reveal, was the capabilities of this particular backpack unit. And because of the nature of the show, you can beep it out if you want to, but I'm going to tell you about my conversation with this particular operator. I'd met him in a social context a couple of times in a group, purposefully introduced to him as somebody who was going to be a valuable source to me as I went down this rabbit hole. And after meeting him twice, he became comfortable enough with me and trustful enough with me that I would only reveal what I'm allowed to reveal. And he agreed to a private meeting. I showed up at the meeting with him, and this is an undisclosed location in Northern Virginia. The first thing he did is he handed me a Faraday bag for my cell phone, but I already had one, and he was very impressed with that I already had my own. And so we began our meeting. And here's what the first thing that this particular special operator said to me. He told me that he is in fact one of the smallest of handful of experts on this particular agitation weapon, this backpack size energy weapon. And he said, the only reason that I agreed to talk to you, and this is an exact quote, is because you already know too fucking much. And he said, but you have no fucking idea what it is actually capable of. And that was his intro to me in this particular meeting. During this meeting, Matt, he then said to me, he said, I am going to appeal to you and to your patriotism to not release all of the capabilities of this particular weapon. He said, the reason why I'm asking you not to go public with this is because there still are actual valuable interests. There are national security interests and actual operational good of this particular type of weapon that we have on the battlefield. And from that conversation, Matt, and this is where it changed significantly, we began to discuss the actual group that he worked with. And I have long insinuated their existence, but there's enough public information now, again, Googleable, that I don't have any problems naming the organization that he and this other small handful of special operators work for. There was a book written 2016 called The Killer Elite, which talked about this particular group. Some of them called them, in this book, they referred to them as the activity. Sometimes they just refer to them as the unit. There was an actual book came out last year about this group called The Unit. And it's only right at about 100 of our most elite operators. These guys are not recruited for their brawn. They don't look like SEALs. They don't look like frogmen. You can recognize a SEAL in a room pretty quickly. You won't recognize one of these guys. They're recruited for their their brains. They're almost all polyglots. In other words, they speak multiple languages. This particular individual that I was talking to right here spoke 5 languages. The member of that same group that introduced me to him, he spoke 8 languages, 5 of them fluent or native, as they say. Um, and they are expert in multiple disciplines. And this group operates out of 2 bases just out either side of north and south of DC, one at Fort Meade in Maryland, the other at Fort Belvoir in Virginia. And if the numbers that I'm given are correct, there's only at any one time 102 operatives in this elite group. And so they're generally referred to, in any special operator that's listening to this broadcast right here, whether they're Green Beret, Navy SEAL, Delta Force, or some other group, will certainly recognize when I say the phrase Task Force Orange. And that's what this group is typically referred to. And so these operators that I'm referring to, who have not only used these battlefield versions of backpack directed energy weapons, or agitation weapons, as they like to call them, also were essential in the development of these weapons as well. Actual consulting engineers themselves in the development and the actual application in the battlefield of these weapons. So this is where this particular conversation turned. Acknowledging that he was a member of Task Force Orange, or TFO, I asked him a couple of questions. I said, humor me for a moment. And let me give you a set of numbers here and see if you agree with this set of numbers or this analysis. If I'm talking about Navy SEALs operators, or if I'm talking about Delta Force, I said, we're probably looking about 85 to 90%, maybe even higher, of those individual groups are conservative, right-leaning politically, Trump supporters, MAGA. I said, is that a fair characterization? He said, yeah, that's probably about right, 85 to 90%. I said, but if we're talking about Task Force Orange, it's only about 60%. Isn't that correct? And he kind of looked up and he went, 55 tops. So what he was saying is that the most elite group in our entire United States military special operations Task Force Orange are somewhere on the order of 40 to 45% liberal, which is starkly different from the other special forces groups. So I asked him then, I said, well, isn't it because of the nature of TFO, and that so much of what you guys do are psychological operations, signal intelligence, human intelligence, things of that nature? Isn't it fairly certain that your commanders know the politics of every individual member of the group? And he said, yeah, that's probably fair. And I said, wouldn't it therefore be possible to take a guy who is left leaning, maybe, I don't know to what degree of left of center he might be, but wouldn't it be possible to convince somebody on the left side of the ledger with this particular skill set that literal Hitler is running for president, and that you would be doing the work of God and country to either take him out or take his people out or take out his key supporters? In this particular TFO operator, he went silent on me for a moment and he goes, fuck. He had never been willing to go there. because these guys were absolutely adamant. And I've met 8 of them now. I've met and interacted with 8 different retired members of TFO, and none of them are willing to allow that their brothers or sisters from that elite unit would be involved in these types of domestic operations at all. But I happen to know that they were there that day on January 6th. And then Newsweek, 1 year later, first week of January 2022, ran a story. And the headline to that story, Matt, was, it was very sensational. It was definitely very clickbaity, but it said that special commandos, or secret commandos rather, with shoot to kill orders at January 6th. That was written by what you and I would refer to as a Mockingbird Media member, William Arkin, a consistent and valued source of our intelligence community and Department of Defense for many years, and leaking information and controlling narrative in the manner that they want it controlled, put this out there because I had 10 and a half months earlier put it out in my little bitty blog, but it was starting to get headwind. And, through the various interviews that I had done and podcasts that I'd been on, things of that nature, long before I was with the Blaze. So it was something that they needed to head off at the pass. And in that particular article, it did say that while this particular elite unit was, it was unnamed, was there, we do not know what their operational stance was. The military has not released that to us. So 10 and a half months after I put that out there, Newsweek came forward with it with the same exact information.
The Free Life, Portrait of an Artist is the new documentary by Free the People, the story of Cuban-born artist Carlos Luna, who fled socialism under Castro to find his free life in America. You can watch it exclusively at civil.com, CIVL.com, throughout the month of December for free at civil.com. Check it out. So this reminds me of the mad science experiments that were done in the name of national security that was gain-of-function research. This also was a military / intelligence operation that goes all the way back to 2001. And the question always is, let's put on our libertarian hat, because we know that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Who is policing the police with these insanely dangerous science experiments?
I'll take your truism one step further. Frank Herbert, the author of Dune, he said it's not so much that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. He said it's that the corruptible are inherently attracted to power. And that's what makes it so difficult to even answer that question, is who is policing these elements within our intelligence community and Department of Defense. And we're going to have to rely upon the whistleblowers. That's really it. And it takes special individuals to come out and to have these conversations for a lot of reasons. Let me just give you an example. Very, very quickly. I mean, we have the examples of the FBI whistleblowers. Some of them were whistleblowing as a result of the attacks on individual liberties within the FBI related to the COVID jab, that sort of thing. They refused. And when they refused, they asked for religious exemptions, or whatever the case may be, religious medical exemptions. If they were denied that exemption, then they were given the option of getting swabs stuck up their nose every day when they came into the office, or twice a week, whatever it was. And if they denied that, then they were they had their gun, their shield, their badge, their security clearance taken away from them. They were put on administrative leave, suspended without pay, without the ability to even get a job. Well, when you understand that most of these FBI agents, whether they've got 5 years in or 15 years in, as a conscientious objector, they have a mortgage, they have a wife, and they have children. And a we're asking somebody to make a incredible and Matt, we're talking about they have a wife, they have kids, they have a mortgage, they have all the things associated with being on the treadmill of life, financially speaking, and they're not allowed to get a job while their pay is taken away from them. So whistleblowers don't come forward, especially after the 2 or 3 that did, and the rest of the, the universe of FBI agents and federal agents see the treatment they got, then they button up.
This is why President Trump is half pregnant at this point, and this is why I'm sure he's watching right now. This is precisely why he should pardon Edward Snowden.
Exactly.
And send a message, because you can't poke the bear. You have to kill the bear, and
Right.
and we have all these new revelations coming from well, they're not actually new revelations, they're exposed revelations coming from Elon Musk and Project Doge, and what they're finding, not only in databases, but the crowdsourcing of citizen investigators exposing NIAID, and that's probably the tip of the iceberg. But I think, and I've been saying this for 15 years, the only thing that protects us from the weaponization of technology, and I always said this in the context of the internet, but it obviously goes much deeper than that. The only thing that protects us from the government turning these weapons against the American people is the power of decentralization, and the power of us paying attention to what they're doing and exposing that. And this to me, you're freaking me out a little bit, but this seems more urgent than even I understood at the time.
It needs to be, because the thing that has brought this to light has been the discussion about the Havana syndrome, or the anomalous health incidents related to exposure to some sort of directed energy device or weapon, particularly by our State Department employees, are the people that are legitimately working overseas for the United States government, even within the IC community, intelligence community, and this has been going on for quite some time now. The CIA is still in abject denial. 100%, no such thing, doesn't exist, no such thing as an IHI. And of course, this is while the DOD is contradicting them and saying, okay, yes, we will admit that there is the possibility of a thing related to directed energy, particularly with our State Department officials overseas. And it started in Havana, but it's the result of exposure to these weapons in multiple locations around the world. In this particular congressional committee hearing, and by the way, it's on C-SPAN. Anybody can go look it up. May 8th. It is a congressional hearing. I forget which committee it was, but it was a very bipartisan hearing. Both Democratic Congress members as well as the Republicans were both, like, same way, freaked out by this and very highly interested in what's going on. So there's none of the typical crap like we've seen in these nomination hearings lately, where the grandstanding and the arguing and the shouting and that sort of thing. It was a very informative hearing, but one of the other things that we learned from the individuals that were testifying, very highly qualified, very highly respected individuals on the committee witness stand, they said that they have for years been tracking the use of these weapons in the United States, in and around DC in particular, Maryland, Northern Virginia, DC itself, as well as down in all the way to Florida. And why Florida? Well, because we have a very large intelligence community operation, particularly related to the DoD out of Tampa area. Excuse me. And so this is the frightening part about this, is that ostensibly neither the CIA or the FBI or the DoD is supposed to be operating against U.S. citizens under any circumstances, but they are. And I have successfully, after much relationship development with operatives within the intelligence community and within TFO and otherwise, been able to get them to agree to certain circumstances whereby they do in fact operate domestically and have operated domestically. There's a chain of command, obviously, within the Department of Defense, and there's a chain of command within Task Force Orange, and it looks like pretty much everybody else's chain of command. From the individual troop to the, the squad leader to going all the way up until you get to the Secretary of Defense. And I have, in my own personal handwritten notes, because I can't use electronic devices when I meet with these guys, is in my handwritten notes, I have a flow chart of their chain of command from top to bottom, all the way down, even to the point of telling me that when they get into what is called a kill capture operation, that they must actually be on the phone with and hear the voice of either the Assistant Secretary of Defense or the Secretary of Defense themselves. They cannot, by order of their squadron leader or their, anybody else in the chain of command, that if it's an actual kill capture, and a kill capture operation is exactly what you think it is. It's either kill him or capture him, or it may be one or the other. Our goal is to capture, or maybe our goal is to assassinate this particular figure overseas. And then they say, except for this. And then in my handwritten notes, there's a arrow that comes off of the chain of command. If we are under the MOU of the CIA, MOU would be Memorandum of Understanding. We don't even go to our troop commander. We can literally get a call. This is TFO. We can get a call from the CIA overseas in an operation and immediately become what they call seconded to them, or seconded. It looks like seconded in the spelling. The Newsweek article I referred to earlier about the secret commandos with shoot the kill orders, they used that phrase, seconded to the FBI. And the reason why they used that in that article is because on January 6th, the FBI pre-deployed the tactical units of every single three-letter federal agency in and around the Capitol. Why did they do that, Matt? If they didn't have intelligence that something was going to go wrong that day. And they use that word that all of these agencies their tactical units were seconded to the FBI that day. In other words, they'd been deputized to operate under the orders of the FBI command structure.
So I'm gobbling red pills by the gallon here at this point.
Sorry about that.
And I want to wrap up with this final thought. You mentioned Dune. There's another science fiction novel called Atlas Shrugged,
yeah.
and most people don't think of it as a science fiction. And I'm thinking back to 2008, maybe even earlier at Ron Paul rallies, and certainly at the Tea Party. You would see those signs. Who is John Galt? And in a lot of ways, that's symbolic of this discovery process that we're all going through, because we're empowered by technology and we're able to learn things that, back in the day of Operation Mockingbird and MK Ultra, these were held secrets that at best were on paper. But now you can dig deeper. And in the book Atlas Shrugged, and most people don't remember this, even those of us that have read it more than once, there's a government science operation by a guy run by a guy named Dr. Robert Statler, and he creates a weapon with ostensibly the best of intentions called Project X. Apologies to Elon Musk, because this Project X is is quite evil, and it uses sound waves. I don't know if you remember this. It uses sound waves to control people and ultimately kill them. And to your earlier point, ultimately, that weapon becomes a hot potato that the very worst people in our society attempt to get control of. So I think as Ayn Rand was in so many aspects, she was quite predictive in anticipating what can happen when government power is unchecked. And I'll leave it there, and feel free to comment on that, but also just tell us where people can dig deeper on this latest investigation and other projects you may be working on.
Yeah, let me leave you with this quote that dovetails directly into what you just shared, and that is this: is that through a cutout, and what that means in my world is I'm speaking to someone who themselves has a high valuable highly valuable source, or a high ranking member of government of some sort that will not speak to me directly, but they will pass the information through a cutout. It's an intermediary between myself and the source. And through a cutout, a 3-star general, formerly in the command structure of special ops community, was asked about this particular agitation weapon, to which he told my highly trusted intermediary, this is aimed, so these words are aimed at me. Yes, it exists. He said, with it, this is an exact quote, with it, we can stop your heart. We can make you shit your pants. And then he said, but I wouldn't need that on January 6th. He said, I would just need 4 or 5 of my best guys to make January 6th happen. Meaning, we're so good at color revolution operations and starting riots overseas, it would be no problem for us to make January 6th happen domestically.
Or BLM.
Or BLM.
Yep.
Correct. And we know for a fact, and we did a story about this, myself and Joe Hanneman, my colleague here at the Blaze, on the fact that Mark Milley, while he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff working for Trump in 2024, in the BLM riots in DC, authorized the use of both sound and radio weapons in the summer of 2020 in DC.
So where can people, if you haven't gotten enough, where can people read even more to get us really depressed?
Yeah, well, our part 2 of our directed energy weapons series is going to be coming out very soon. Look, our workflow was completely disrupted, as you can imagine, between the inauguration, the pardons, and then the
and you're drunk tweeting at your former prosecutors, as I understand.
Right. My FBI agent. I did give him after my pardon, or my case dismissal, I did send him a text. I was not inebriated at the time, but I invited him to a beer summit, which he very politely turned me down. So I actually hope to make that happen someday. Maybe if he loses his job in this round of new things that are happening at the FBI, maybe he'll be more inclined to go sit down with me. But the bottom line is that obviously at theblaze.com, just look for our work there. Joe Hanneman and I are working on this story together. And then, of course, everything will probably show up first on X. And my handle there is at TPC, the number 4 USA, at TPC 4 USA. And when it drops, it'll drop there first.
Okay, Steve. Thank you for this. And I should make it clear that I have no thoughts of suicide. So if suddenly I disappear, it's all your fault. It's all your fault.
Let me tell you, as I say, sunlight, daylight, whatever you call it, is the best disinfectant, and that's exactly what I've done. I have my dead man switches set up. I regularly announce on open platforms that there are a lot of people in my world, my attorneys, my editors. You're going to have to kill them all.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, so I guess I'm on the list now. Thank you so much for that. I will talk to you soon, Steve.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.